Hi, my name is Natalie Rooney, and I've been a Goodwin House resident now 6 years this month. Um, in Arlington, Virginia, on 9/11, a Tuesday, the day began with a beautiful morning, brilliant blue skies, clear, crisp early autumn weather. I reached over to turn on the radio to listen to the news while I got ready for school. And I stopped and thought, it's such a perfect day. It's such a beautiful day. I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm not going to listen to the news, which is usually discouraging. When I got to school, I was a public school, Arlington Public School Montessori teacher, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And that day, a new 3-year-old was going to join our class. When I got to school, everything went well, and everyone was having a good time. And about 9:50, a message came over the PA system. Stop, evacuate to the basement cafeteria as fast as you can, bring things that your students can do during the day, leave now. And we had no idea what was going on. My assistant got the children in line, and I gathered books and crayons and paper and puzzles, hoping to keep them happy. No one said don't go outside, although my class was the only group that did. We were on the ground floor, so we went outside, and the sky was covered, just total black, oily smoke, some of which we probably breathed. One of the children started crying because he knew that his apartment was in the direction, a kindergartner knew that his apartment was in the direction of the smoke. All the students in the school were crammed into a small cafeteria, and somehow they all got fed and taken care of. The older students got louder and louder and louder as the day went on, but my little ones were very quiet, very still, and almost too quiet. There was a TV in the hallway, so some of the teachers of older students went out to see what was going on, but I didn't feel I could leave my kids. I felt a responsibility to look after them and make sure that they were not frightened. And other teachers came back and told me, when away from the students, about the two planes crashing in New York City, which we hadn't known, and about the plane hitting the Pentagon. I was afraid there might be a second plane to hit the Pentagon. And I was afraid for my life all that day, and I was, more than that, felt terribly responsible for the lives of my little children. There was a lot of tension. The principal's husband worked in the Pentagon. Two of the teachers on staff had husbands who were due at 9 a.m. at the Pentagon to meet with the principal's husband. And it was finally about 2:30 that those two women got phone calls from their husbands. The phones were not working until then. So they'd been held up in traffic, and they were safe. But we didn't know what happened to the principal's husband. Finally, I reached my husband around 3 by phone, and it was a great relief to him. Throughout the day, parents came to pick up their children in the office. The office folk would talk over walkie-talkies down to the cafeteria. When it was one of my students called, my assistant would stay with the other children. I would bring that child upstairs. The reunions were deeply emotional, many tears. I cried too. The last child in the school was one of my students, and he was not picked up until 6 o'clock. Traffic from DC was totally blocked. The roads were impassable with so many people trying to escape the city. I stayed with the principal till 6:30, 6:40, when she decided to leave and decided that no news meant her husband had probably not survived. Someone came that night and told her that he had died. Someone from the Pentagon came and told her that he had died and gave her a small piece of fabric from his clothing. That was all that was left of him. We went back. I spent the rest of the week at home on the sofa watching 9/11 over and over. I have no memory of my daughter coming home from college. I have no memory of my adult son being there or my husband. All I know was for the week, I lay on the sofa and didn't move. I was in such shock. My house was about halfway between the Pentagon and a mosque that's not far from here. And right away, there were helicopters flying over up Route 50, Arlington Boulevard, back and forth, constantly. And at first, it was very frightening to hear. But eventually, after 2 weeks when they stopped, it was kind of frightening how silent things were. We went back to school on the next Monday. A substitute principal told the staff, buck up. And he discouraged us strongly from talking with each other about 9/11, which I don't think helped any of us. But really, people didn't talk about it. I learned afterwards that the teacher in the room next to me had been in the library and happened to be looking out the window at the moment that the plane hit. She didn't see the plane, but she saw the explosion. She ran to the office to tell the principal. Principal called the superintendent. Superintendent's office said, no, that's in New York City. And 10 minutes later, superintendent's office called back and said, evacuate to the basement. My school was less than half a mile from the Pentagon. Later, I learned that there was a kindergarten class out on the grassy area in front of the school. And when the PE teacher was with them and she heard the loud sound of the plane coming, she screamed, run inside, run inside. They all did. But she and a good number of the children saw the plane as it went over part of our school. We were in direct line with the Pentagon. I later found out that the custodian that I was friends with and who helped my class I knew he lived very close to the school building, and the tall trees in his yard were tipped by the plane passing over. It was that close to us. In October, the principal's husband's funeral was held. Retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Robert Email. He was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency and was based in the Pentagon in the section that took the direct hit. His funeral was held in Woodbridge, his funeral service. There was an overflow crowd out. Not all of them could fit into this very large church. It was very eerie driving from the church to Arlington Cemetery on 395. Not one car in any lane in any direction. Everything was closed from Woodbridge to the Pentagon for this funeral. At Arlington Cemetery, there was a flyover, a B-52 flyover. Mr. Email had been a co-pilot in Vietnam, piloting a B-52. It had crashed, and he nearly died when the plane was burst into flames. But he ended up dying in the Pentagon when a plane crashed into his area, and his office burst into flames. This flyover was only the second time that one was ever allowed at Arlington Cemetery. For the next 2 to 3 months, all the adults in the school wore small American flag pins, as if we were somehow protected by wearing them. The cars and stores in Arlington had flags everywhere. Especially immigrant drivers had flags hanging on the front of their car or on a post. Soon after, and throughout the rest of the school year, students received gifts from all over the country. Handmade teddy bears, stuffed animals, dolls, hand-carved wooden toys. Eventually, there were so many that I started to give them to Goodwill. The children had no idea why they were getting these gifts. After the first month or so, they really pretty much moved on and were not showing trauma. In that first month, they were stacking any materials, any objects, and smashing them down. And the pictures had no smiles, and the paintings were very angry. After the funeral, the principal had a grove of trees planted in the front of the school building, honoring her husband's memory. And she had a memorial stone placed by the entrance. We passed this stone every morning coming into school. It looked like a tombstone right at the entrance. Later on, I learned that the father of my husband's best friend would have been on the plane that hit the Pentagon, but he was delayed by traffic in Boston. Two of my daughter's best friends from high school were at NYU and happened to be near the Trade Center at that time, and they stood there and watched people jumping. Another high school friend of hers was working in construction on a high floor of a new building being built right across from the Pentagon. And he actually saw the plane hit. It hit us again each time we learned of close people that were so close to the event. Several of the mothers of children in my class wore hijab, and they brought their children to school on the public bus. They were shouted at, threatened, frightened, and embarrassed. And I tried to comfort them and say that not all Americans felt that way. They were such good people. During the next year, I needed to drive by the Pentagon often, just doing daily things, and seeing the reconstruction in progress was always painful for me. I had gradually lost my voice due to stress, and by Thanksgiving, I had trouble swallowing any Thanksgiving dinner. Soon after that, I had to go for 2 weeks of total silence, not a word, and that for me was very difficult. Fortunately, I had a wonderful assistant, so I still went to school, and she ran the class, or I wrote down what she could say to them. I still occasionally, when things get stressful, lose my voice temporarily. I never had that happen before, but that was a legacy from 9/11. Later, I heard from others about how upset they were on 9/11. A cousin in St. Louis told me he'd been so worried that a bridge across the Mississippi might have been hit. And he didn't understand why I was more shaken and upset than he was. Many folks told me that they remembered exactly where they were when they heard the news, and that was very upsetting for them. But for those in my school community, it wasn't a news story. happening somewhere else. We felt that we lived it. And for me, it was the most traumatic day of my life. I wish I could say that we learned something from this, but, and I know some individuals who did make it a point to learn more about Islam, but in general, I think the country became more hateful. Certainly when we went to war, people were not just blaming the individuals, they were blaming Muslims, and over time, other hatred was fostered against Mexicans, and I mean, it became all right in some circles to speak out loud about the hatred people felt. And I think that personally was reflected in the election of 16. I'm hoping maybe now with a cessation of war, maybe people will start to rethink what's happened over the last 20 years. I don't think if people had learned acceptance at the time of 9/11, that we would have been in a 20-year war. I love America and I love our ideals, but I'm very saddened by how we don't live up to them.